What? I'm a developer. I solve problems, you know? Anyway, so yeah, developer avocado at Google. I do deal a lot with like SEO stuff, but I know, just a quick poll of hands, who here in the audience as a developer has worked with SEOs? Who here enjoyed that? That's what I thought. And it's not their fault, and I'm going to talk to you about why it's not really their fault and why this is interesting. So I don't like to think about myself as being the person who deals with technical SEO. I think about the person who figures out how SEOs can do better at their job and understand what we developers do, and us developers understand what value SEO can bring to us and how it's done properly without all the, like, I sacrifice a chicken and hopefully we're going to rank better, right? So here we go. Let's say I start with a personal example usually. My personal example is I love doggos and puppers. And I think, I mean, the internet is basically tubes full of cats, but I think doggos and puppers should get their fair share of that tube of, you know, imagery. So I have all these beautiful doggos and puppers, and I have these images on my devices, but I want to share them with you all. I want to share them with everyone who needs a doggo and pupper image in their life. You know, you wake up hungover and you're like, oh, the world is terrifying. And then you look at a doggo and pupper or whatever, like one of these beautiful ones, and you're like, ah, life is not as bad, probably. This is going to be a good day. So let's make a website. Because let's face it, the web is the biggest platform to get content to people, right? Who here has an Android phone? Who here has an iOS device? Who here has a Windows mobile phone? That's fine. It was a good experiment, I think. Anyhow, all of you, though, have a browser somewhere. So if I give you content on the web, you can consume it, right? So basically, I just want to make a website so that everyone can find my doggos and puppers. This is actually quite cool because these days it's relatively easy to get started. Even if you have no idea about web development, if you have an idea about web development, it's still pretty nice. You just like get the framework of your choice, you create a new project, you have a local development server, you don't have to like deal with XAMPP or LAMP or whatever anymore, and you just like keep iterating and you build your thing to the point where you're happy with it. Then it even does all the production optimizations for yourself, so like code splitting, tree shaking, minimization, whatever. All this kind of stuff happens pretty much away with like typing away in a console. So that's pretty cool. And now the only thing I need to do is like I push it somewhere on the internet. Maybe I use GitHub pages, or I use Now, or Zeit, or whatever. Doesn't really matter. I put it somewhere on the internet, and then I buy a cute domain, obviously, and then I'll be successful. Right? Everyone can now see my doggos and puppers, and they get like really excited and happy, and maybe they even like post their own doggos and puppers, because this is probably like a really cool single-page app, or even a progressive web app or something, where people can probably like rate the dogs and like comment on them. Well, commenting on the internet is not a good idea generally, but let's say it is, and they can like upload their own dogs, and everything is great, except that's not the reality. This is a little more likely. So if I see these numbers here, they don't make me happy. They don't spark joy, as Marie Kondo would say. So to spark joy, instead of making this wonderful emoji appear, I might want to figure out, how do people actually find new websites? So I now made a new website. It has a fantastic domain. How do I get people to find it? Well, how do you find new websites? It's a little bit in the name, probably. I mean, you know, you might go to this website or another website that has an input field that lets you like put stuff in, and then you find stuff that fits what you put in. So you might search for it, right? So I want to make sure that my website can be found. But how does that work? I mean, we know that, you know, computers are pretty much like run by smoke, because if you smash them and the smoke comes out, they don't work anymore. But I don't think there's going to be magic smoke that makes search engines work. So somehow my website needs to be getting into this, right? So how does it get into it? I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine. They are called Googlebot. Googlebot is basically a bunch of infrastructure at Google that crawls, renders, and indexes the web. Now, what does that mean? Well, we start out with a bunch of URLs. You could think like a database or a text file or whatever, where there's like a bunch of URLs that we happen to know. And we pass these into a crawler, which is basically a really dumb browser. It's like curl, right? You probably all have used curl at some point. We basically just get the HTML via HTTP or HTTPS, and then we process it. And the first thing we do is we look into your HTML and see if there's any links in it. Because if there's links, that means we find new URLs that we can like put into the queue to crawl the next time we can come around and crawling. So that's pretty cool. But the problem is that modern websites are a little different. Like, what is this website about? I told you doggos and puppers. What is wrong with you people? Anyhow, so this doggos and puppers website isn't exactly obvious, right? I mean, it's like, is this good? Is this bad? What does this mean for Googlebot? Does that mean that Googlebot doesn't know what's going on my website? Does it mean that I'm not seeing any links here? What happens now? Well, the thing is, the good news is, Googlebot is JavaScript friendly. We do execute JavaScript. Now, a few people then like run weird tests and say, well, Martin, this is not quite true. I mean, I have tried. And I'm like, yes, because it turns out the web is quite big. So in 2016, Googlebot crawled 130 trillion URLs. That's a 13 with 13 zeros. So I don't know. Have you ever like run a browser and checked like the CPU and memory statistics? That's quite a bit, right? So we can't do this all in one go. So we have to like, step down a little bit and go like, okay, we're going to do it as we can. As fast as we can, we're going to run JavaScript and render these pages properly. Which means we don't do it right away. Instead, we have another queue. So we put the URLs that we need to render into the queues. And then as resources become available, we basically run a headless browser. That's what we do. In this case, a headless Chromium. And once this has finished, it returns us the rendered HTML. So that's the HTML that contains all content after JavaScript execution. So your React, Angular, Vue, Ember, whatnot apps, backbone, will definitely return some more content here. And then we can do this again. We can check, are there any links in there? Do we get new URLs to crawl? And also, what is this page about? What is the content of this page? In this case, like doggos and puppers has a bunch of images. Great. So now we can put that into the index. We put over 200 pieces of information, each called a signal, into this. Like, this is about doggos, this has this many links, this has this many images, this is this fast, is this using HTTPS, and many, many more. So we gather these signals, and then later, when a user comes and asks for doggos and puppers, and queue doggos and puppers in specific, we look through our entire index and all these 200 signals for each of them to figure out which one is the best result for this particular query at this particular time. That's a completely whole different beast. That has nothing to do with Googlebot. Basically, Googlebot exits the process here. We put something in the index, and then we're done. Afterwards, ranking happens. That's a completely different monster. We're not going to talk about that today. Cool. So I now know Googlebot does run JavaScript, and basically once it discovers a URL, or I submit a URL to Googlebot, it's going to come around, crawl it, render it, and then my beautiful content is in Google search. But there's another interesting problem. If you actually type in cute doggos and puppers, you might notice that you might not be the first one to come up with the idea of putting cute doggos and puppers on the internet. There's a few others. So that raises the question, how do I make sure that my doggos and puppers are found? Because they are the cutest, obviously. So I want to make sure that I'm somewhere on the top of the, goodbye laptop. I'm on top of the list somewhere. So the first tip that I've got for you is not a technical one, but bear with me, okay? This is where good SEO consultants come in and stop your marketing departments of doing dumb shit. Even though dumb shit is a good thing, but sometimes you shouldn't be doing dumb shit. So you want to make sure that you have good content that users are interested in and want, and communicate that properly. What does that mean? Let's have a look. So let's say a product company hired like a designer and a few marketing people, and they had a meeting, and then they came up with this beautiful website. So this website is about, actually let me change that real quick, is about hot bread TM, whatever that is. And apparently it's smart, simple, and beautiful, and it will disrupt your breakfast. Thermochemical food processing, the best invention since sliced bread. Okay, what can I do on this website? Well, you can find like the homepage, you can find our philosophy. What the flip? You can also find the hot bread X10, and you can join the movement. This is a toaster. If you didn't pick up on the thermochemical food processing, this is a toaster. I made this up, but I found websites that look more or less like this and complain that they're not found in search. Let's see what they could do better. How about this one? Right? So this one has a name that somewhat resembles what this is about. It tells you this is the fastest toaster. It tells you it basically like never burns your toast again. It gets your toast faster, and it's, you know, try Toasty McToaster face. And up here, I can also see like how to choose a toaster, because honestly, I haven't done my research yet, right? I should probably do some more research if I want to. I mean, that's a commitment, getting a toaster, right? It also tells you what other toasters they might have. So like Toasty McToaster face is probably just one of the many, and you can buy a toaster. So if I'm searching for a fast, cheap toaster that doesn't burn my toast, this is a good website, because it says like it's the fastest toaster, it doesn't burn my toast, and I can buy a toaster here. This website, not so much, right? I mean, it has a picture of a toaster. That's a step, I guess. So basically what I'm trying to say here is, make sure that you are giving people what they want, not like some fancy, airy marketing blah. Figure out what is it that my user actually needs, what is it that I'm trying to give to my user, and then talk about it in a way that your user understands. Because what you're trying to do here is, people searching for something, they're not going to type in your company name necessarily, they're not going to know your product, they might not even know that such a product exists, they might have to do some research first. So they're going to type something in, trying to figure out what's going on here. Maybe I'm buying my first toaster and I'm like really, really scared of commitment, so I might actually go like, so how do I choose a toaster, right? So if you give users in different stages of the journey of making a decision, if you give them something that they can work from and they can basically like use links to get further, that is a really good strategy. I know this is not technical, I know this is not your problem, but you know, generally speaking, if you spot your website to be the one for hotbread TM, tell someone that that might not be a great idea. Because in the end, I don't know about you, but I, as a developer, want to build stuff that matters and that people actually use. So, you know, making sure that people find your thing is probably a good idea. The other tip is somewhat technical. You want to make sure that users get to the content as quick as possible. If I really, really, really want doggos and poppers, and I'm on a train in Germany, I don't know if you've ever used mobile internet in Germany. My general recommendation is don't try it. You might get something like, okay, hey, doggos. That's not really a good experience. If I click on like 10 different search results and I get the tabs, I might actually just like swap through the tabs like, no, 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 doggos. So that's not a good experience either. And I mean, if you look at it, we lose so many seconds, and the first moment we actually get to a doggo is there, and like, what is all this bullshit? You can make that better. You can actually like shave off full seconds by just using hybrid rendering or server-side rendering. So that's something that you should consider. Performance being one of the over 200 signals that we are using. And also you want to make sure, and this is something that you as a developer can actually influence, and I'm going to show you how in a second, that your content does shine, that your content does stand out. What do I mean by that? Let's have a look at search results. So the first thing I do when I see search results like this is probably I look at the title. This title is a good one. 40 of the cutest, fluffiest, and cuddliest poppers and doggos. It's 40. It's got 40 of them. Nice. The second one, I don't know. That's a random Twitter person. This could be like a racist or something. Who knows, right? You never know. They are misleading. This could be a Russian election troll bot or something. Who knows? For all I know, I don't know. And these guys do have 21 joyous photos of doggos and poppers. Okay, that's quite nice. So now I could basically rule out the middle one, but the first one and the second one, maybe it's only 21, but maybe they are better, right? It's not always quantity, it's quality. So I can look at these snippets, and it's like, here are 40 of the cutest dogs alive, whether they be puppies or adults. So it's like, okay, at least they're alive, that's a good start. But then down here they say, like, we recently asked our subscribers, blah, 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 to submit photos of their super cute pets. If you've ever met a person who like owns any kind of pet, they think it's cute, You and science might disagree, right? So I'm not sure. I would go with the first result, probably based on the title and the snippet for description. So how do you do this? And this is where it gets technical. Finally, freaking finally. I'm on slide 51, and finally it gets technical. God damn it. No, but I think it's important to understand what comes into play and what other people, SEOs, can help you with. You don't have to figure out how to write these descriptions. You don't have to figure out how to structure your content. That's what a good SEO talks about to the execs and the marketing and business side, right? You don't have to do that if you have a good SEO. What you can do, though, is depending on what kind of framework you're using, you want to make sure that you're doing a few basic steps right. And I don't see them discussed often enough, so I'd like to talk about them a little bit. If you are using React, you definitely want to make sure to use a package such as helmet from the NFL. So you get your helmet component in, and then in the template, you can basically specify the title and the description. And you should do that for each page. Each of your pages should have a descriptive title and meta description. If your website is Barbara's recipe blog, that's great, but if every single recipe that you have in the search results says Barbara's recipe blog, I'm like, but I looked for a quick apple pie recipe. So now, like, which of the 10 is the quick? I don't know, because it all says Barbara's baking blog. What the hell, right? So make sure that these titles match the data that you're showing. If you're in an online shop, show the product name. If it's in the meta description, show the product description or something that you want people to make a buying decision on. So basically, you can do that for each of your pages using components such as React Helmet. Now, you might not be using React. You might be using Angular. That's cool. Angular has a built-in thing, or two built-in things, called the title and meta services. With the title and meta services, you are able to do the exact same thing. For each of your pages, you can set, surprise, surprise, the title and the meta description. And you need to do that, because that's what shows up in the search results. That matters, right? For Vue, you install Vue Meta, again, an external component, and then what you want to make sure that you do not miss out on is you want to put your Vue router into history mode. Do not use fragment URLs. I'm going to explain to you in a moment why that is. So basically, we put our Vue router into history mode, and then we use the meta info method in our components for each of the pages to generate a title and a meta tag. Reactivity works in these. So if you have something that like fetches from an API, that works just fine. Cool. So that's like the very, very basic things. But you might also think about like the server-side and hybrid rendering that I talked about. So how can you like get started with that quickly? Well, if you're using React, if you do like a marketing website or a product website, consider switching to Next.js. Next.js does a lot of the heavy lifting for you already, which is kind of nice. And it does a bunch of the stuff in an easier, nicer way as well. Angular comes with Angular Universal. That also gives you like hybrid rendering for Angular applications. They have like a guide on that that explains how that works. And Vue.js came up with Nuxt.js, heavily inspired by Next.js, I believe, and they do the same thing. So do have a look at these three higher-level frameworks if you want to figure out how to do the server-side and hybrid rendering without the pain. It can actually help you avoid SEO cliffs yourself. If you don't want to change your code that much, or if you just want to change the server infrastructure, not your entire like front-end code, you might want to go for a workaround that we call dynamic rendering. Dynamic rendering has another upside, which is your pages won't rely on JavaScript anymore for crawlers, but the users still get like the nice bit. This works like this. If your server detects a regular user coming by and saying like, hi, I want to use your app, then you just send them the regular source code, you'll be fine. But if a crawler, which in all crawlers that matter tell you that they are a crawler, if a crawler comes to your server and says like, hi, so I might not be executing JavaScript because I just can't be bothered, Googlebot does, not all other crawlers do, right? So if a crawler comes that doesn't execute JavaScript, how can we help them without changing our front-end code? Well, we pass our front-end code into a renderer, which is basically a pre-rendering service. There's like services that you can throw money at to make the problem go away, or you just basically run a headless browser, and then that generates the static HTML after rendering, and you send the static HTML version to the crawler. But Martin, what about cloaking? If you hear an SEO talking about cloaking, in this context, that means they don't understand what cloaking means. Cloaking is when you say, like, to a bot, you say, this is a website about cute bunnies. And then when an actual user clicks on it, it's like, do you want to buy some pills? That is cloaking. We'd catch that. If we catch you doing that, not good, right? But if the website just looks a little bit different, the content is mostly the same. It can be even like different content. As long as it's content that the user would expect, you'll be fine. It's not cloaking. Don't worry about it. Even Bing has published a blog post saying like, yes, you can do that. Don't worry about it. You have it documented. There's a blog post as well that you can read if you go for like dynamic rendering with Rendertron. I'm going to show you the name in a second. Then you find a blog post that explains it step by step in an example application. Basically, you have a bunch of solutions. You have services that you can pay money for, or you can build your own using Puppeteer. That allows you to like remote control a browser, a headless Chromium. I think Firefox bindings are in the working, so that's probably going to happen at some point. If you want a more ready-made solution, try Rendertron. Rendertron basically runs a headless Chrome and gives you a way to like either proxy from your load balances or basically integrate it into Express or something, and then does dynamic rendering for you. It has a maintained list of crawlers, so that's pretty good. Okay, but there's a bunch of stuff that can go wrong. SEO and search engine rendering comes with its own quirks and problems and challenges, and I want to talk about a few of them and show you how to work around them. So what happens if my pages aren't discovered? They just like don't show up in search. Well, maybe look at your links. If your homepage shows up, but none of the linked pages, look at your links. This is a good link. I like this link. I like this link a lot because it does the right thing. It does have an A tag for anchor, and it has an href that is a URL that you can browse to. Good boy. Then we have this one. That's fine as well. It still has the URL. It still is a link tag. It has an on-click handler. That's fine. You can basically like do page transitions or whatever, history API stuff. Cool. Not a problem. What's not so great is this. Because where does this URL go? From the perspective of a crawler that doesn't run JavaScript, nowhere. Because we are not sure. This function might not actually go somewhere. It might just do whatever. Rotate the page 180 degrees. What not? WebGL is fantastic, isn't it? So like, not good. No. I mean, yes, cool. A for effort that you have an href there, but that's not a URL that I can actually like put into a messenger and then someone else on the other side could like put it in their browser and magically appear on the right page. Not good. Same here. No. Give us a proper URL. And this one. No. No. Breaks assistive technology, breaks crawlers. No. I'm going to hunt your dreams if you're like doing this. So focus on these two. So if you're still not being discovered, then you might want to have a look if your URLs make sense. So URLs are supposed to look more or less like this. You have a machine name, a host name, in this case like example.com, so there might be one or more computers that respond to that name. And then you have like multiple paths on these URLs, and then either like this one could be a directory or a document, doesn't really matter. And then you might actually specify a part of the content that you want to specifically zoom into. So you have a long document, and one specific part of this existing content you want to focus into. That's great, you can do that. Crawlers don't care about this last part, the fragment identifier, or the subsection in this case. Doesn't matter, because we only care about the document, really, and then what happens within the document, But if you abuse that to change the content, as we did, we had to. When single-page applications came up as an idea, people were like, so how can we make a navigation without an actual navigation? Well, if the hash changes, we get a JavaScript event. So we can change the content. That's great. That's OK. That was a fantastic experiment. It was successful. We now have a solution for that without this hack. It's called the history API. That gives you a URL that looks like a proper URL, can be properly served, and works just as fine. Yeah, but Martin, what about browser support? Yeah, browser support is a thing, I get that. But I mean, we're going down to Internet Explorer 11, and ignore Opera Mini for a second, because people who are on using Opera Mini, and people who have like Internet Explorer 8 or something, I worked with a bank somewhere at some point, and they're like, we have Internet Explorer 8. I'm like, why the hell would you do that? For security reasons. And I'm like, well, I guess that's a fair point. I guess no one makes any like exploits for these anymore. So fair enough. But if you're on a machine that runs an Internet Explorer 8, you're probably not on the latest and greatest MacBook. You're probably on a machine that is quite mature, I would say. So JavaScript engines back then weren't fantastic. So probably if you are forcing this on them, they're going to see like a spinner for like a minute or something. It's fine if the page just refreshes. They'll be fine with the navigation. They're going to be like, oh yeah, you know, this is this computer. I mean, what did you expect? Similar for Opera Mini, low-end mobile devices or people who are really aware of data and battery, then they probably also are fine if the page refreshes once I click on a link. That's okay, don't worry about it. But what if it gets crawled but doesn't end up in the index? So what can go wrong there? Well, if I am a regular developer, user, whatever, I click on my homepage, basically, I go to the main page of my application when I develop, and I click on the links, and it works. And it works because basically what happens is my browser gets the main page from the server, it comes back with the index HTML and all, or app HTML, or whatever you configured, and it gives you all the JavaScript executes in the browser, and that can be like single-page routing or service worker, whatever. And basically, the next request I make when I click on the next link goes through my JavaScript. Can be the service worker, can be some other handler. And they do whatever they have to do to get the data to show the new content, and then they show the new content. They might have asked the server, they might not have asked the server, right? It can be from a GraphQL backend or something. And the new content arrives, and I'm like, yeah, this works, this is great. However, if I then basically would send the /about link to a friend who has not been to the main page of my application, you want to make sure that this doesn't happen. They get /about. The server goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. I only have an index HTML. I don't have an about. What is this about you're talking about? So you might want to make sure that you have hosting that does support you properly. S3 can be a problem there. GitHub pages can be a problem there. And you want to make sure that your deployment is set up correctly. I've seen this more often than I would like to see it. So people are like, well, these pages are not indexed. I'm like, because they are inaccessible to anyone who hasn't been to one of the other pages first. So do make sure that your server side is set up for the client-side routing. It sounds weird, but that's what you should want to make sure. What if a few more pages than I would like are being indexed? Whoopsies, right? So like you have a shop and a bunch of products went out of stock and you don't no longer sell them, but they show up in search and they keep showing up in search. Then it's probably because you are doing something that we call a soft 404. We try to detect them. So in this case, the server says 200 OK, but the content actually says, whoops, this page does not exist. In this case, the crawler, our Googlebot, would probably in the processing stage go like, oh, this content looks like it's actually a 404 or an error page, but it's not giving us an error, so this is a bit weird. And that can happen because, in single-page applications, the server response has already been given, and then I click from one thing to the other without actually contacting the server. So how am I going to generate a 404? Well, what you can do is you are in an error state to begin with. You might as well reload or redirect those pages where you find an error using JavaScript to an error page that goes to the server and actually gets an 400 or something back. Speaking of 400 and 404 and 410, so you can tell us if it's gone, please do. But if it's not gone, if you just change the URL and like the content went from here to there, you want to make sure that you tell us. And the reason is very simple. Imagine you have never been to Zurich, and I'm like giving you a recommendation for a really good fondue place, because that's what you eat in this kind of weather in Zurich at this time of the year, especially as a tourist. So I'm like, yeah, you have to go to this particular address, Friburger Fondue Stübli, fantastic food. And you're like, yes, you go there, and you see a dry cleaning service. So the place has apparently just gone out of business. That's unfortunate. And you keep wandering and wandering and wandering around the town, and in some other part of the town, you see a Friburger Fondue Stübli, and you're like, oh, so is this the place that Martin recommended, and they just moved, or not? I don't know. I think Martin's recommendation isn't valid for this place anymore because it's in a completely different place, and maybe the name is slightly different, and right? You're not sure about this. This is not a good state to be in. But if the dry cleaner had a little piece of paper in the window that says, we have moved to this new address, you'd be like, oh, all right, okay. You go there, and it's like, well, it's the same place as has been here before, so Martin's recommendation is probably valid. Remember, we collect over 200 signals for each URL. So if the URL just disappears and the content appears on a new one, we're like, okay, this is a new thing, so we're gonna start over again and like collect all this information again, and that's gonna take you some time, and it's not gonna necessarily rank well immediately. Not great. But if you have a redirect to the same kind of content or very similar content, we're like, so this has moved here, and it looks like this piece of content is more or less the same as it has been before, so we can just move the signals along, right? We know about this content, so we just move it to the new URL, and you'll be fine. So give us a 301 or 302 redirect if it just moved. You can make that happen. Again, you might redirect using JavaScript. You might as well just redirect by going to a server-side thing, and then the server does the redirect. It doesn't matter. The implementation details don't matter to us. And then you give us a 200 only if the content is actually there and it's all right. There is a thing, though. Someone thought they found a smart solution, and that someone was me. Before I joined Google, I thought, yeah, you know, we can work around this problem. And my thinking was, so our application only knows if a certain product exists once we have made an API call. So what we could do is we could just put like no index in the HTML that says like, hey, Googlebot, don't index this, and then use JavaScript once we know that this product exists to actually remove that information. And then Googlebot will, you know, index only the good pages. So it might look like this, you know, you do like some API call and get product, and then you get the product, and if the product doesn't exist, then you're just like, nope, because there's a no index, so don't worry about it. If the product exists, though, you might get the meta tag there and remove it. Cool, right? Problem solved. No longer indexing error pages. Except that's not what happened, and there's a reason for it. So what actually happens is the crawler comes, grabs the HTML, and goes, here is some HTML. And the processor now looks at the HTML and goes like, nice! They don't want this in the index anyway, so done here, right? Which means that the JavaScript wasn't executed, which means not good, right? So all the products disappeared from search results. Not good. So don't do that. Bad idea. What if you do some testing, or like an SEO comes back and says like the page is blank in Google? That can happen. Why does that happen? It works on my browser, it works on Firefox, it works in Internet Explorer. What's going on here? Well, the thing is, the renderer that I talked about is a little behind. If it would be a child, it would now talk to us and walk around. It's like nearly 4 years old now. That has many, many complicated reasons, because actually running renderers at scale turns out to be quite complex. So there have been like a bunch of modifications to the Chrome source code. We are working on actually, so the reason why this takes us so long is we don't want to just like update once a year. We want to make sure that we stay up to date with Chrome within a week. So if a new Chrome stable version comes out within a week, we want Googlebot to run that Chrome version. To do so, we had to do like a lot of infrastructure changes and a lot of code changes. If you've ever heard of headless Chrome, a lot of that work comes from the Google team, from the Googlebot team, where they have specifically invested time and effort to make Google Chrome as a whole better and more lightweight and controllable. So Puppeteer is also to some degree a result of the Googlebot team fixing this problem. So we will hopefully have news on this soon. I will not give you a timeline because I learned my lesson in giving timelines to people, and then they're like, hold you accountable to them, which is fine. But you know, this is complex. It's more complex than I would like. So soon, TM, we're gonna fix that. So how do you test or debug your sites and pages for Google search? The first stop should probably be the mobile-friendly test. Now, the name kind of suggests it gives you information if your page is mobile-friendly, and that's nice. But how does that help me as a developer? Well, that's not the only thing it does. It also gives you a screenshot of above-the-fold content. So basically, you can like look at that and say, like, OK, it's not blank. That's good. Title shows up. That's fantastic. OK, that looks more or less fine. What if I want to see if my meta tags or content below the fold is fine? Well, I can just look at the rendered source code. This is the source code that comes back from our renderer. So you'll see problems in here, which is kind of nice. And on top of all of that, it gives you JavaScript console logs, including stack traces. So you can use that with local servers. I use ngrok for this, so I tunnel my local server, my local development server, to ngrok and then use that as my URL to test here. And then while I develop, I can see if there's any problems. I can fix these problems. I can retest quite quickly. That's great, right? We also have Search Console that's a little bigger. That's a slightly bigger gun. It gives you information on how pages are doing. So in this case, this is like an error. So we have an error here. The submitted URL was not found. So this is maybe a sneaky 404. Maybe I need to look into this. SEOs can share this particular page with you, and you can investigate, and you can fix it. And if you think you fixed it, you can press the Validate Fix button, and it tells you if it actually was fixed. Also, Search Console sends you emails. You don't have to go to that tool and test or check and read. It sends you emails if there's a problem. So that's also very nice. It also gives you a general overview of like how many errors on the site do I have, how many pages are in the index, how many pages didn't make it to the index but were crawled. You can also see how often pages have shown up for certain search queries, so you can figure out if your content works well. That's more for the marketing people, but it's still nice to see what people are searching for. If you have a blog, this can get you information on what people like, what words people use for things that you have blog posts about, so that's kind of interesting. So maybe you rephrase it a little bit based on that. You can also inspect URLs. You basically just like put them in here, run it, and then you get index data. Now, this index data is kind of something you don't want any random competitor to see, so you have to verify yourself first for the domain. You have to make sure that you can demonstrate to us that you own this domain. If you're using Google Analytics, that's really easy. If you use email or DNS or anything, which you do if you have a domain, you can use that as well to prove to us that you own the domain, and then we're going to start gathering this information and emailing you about problems. So Search Console is pretty much a power tool. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or something, come to me in the break and ask. I'm happy to answer. If you have questions like, on our website, I can't answer those, but there's like the product forums. The Webmaster Forum has plenty of smart people that answer your questions. There is going to be a YouTube series coming up in a couple of weeks about all this like JavaScript-specific bits and pieces. And if you have JavaScript-specific questions, you can also go to bit.ly, JS Sites Working Group, and ask us. We have plenty of documentation. If you see documentation that is missing, or if you're like, I would like to see more documentation on this topic, ping us. We are happy to take that feedback and work on more documentation for you. That's literally my job. We also have Hangouts, so if you want to like join our office hours every second week, my boss basically runs a Hangouts open office hours where you can ask your questions and learn from others asking questions. So if that's the thing, try it out. Thank you very much.
This conference has been gradually getting better for me. The quality of the lineup is usually really, really good, and this is something I'm really saying thumbs up.
They're really trying to get speakers here that are pushing to the future of web technologies.
I just feel like it's a very community-driven conference. It also has a lot of quality, and people are just nice. Hi, my name is Sarah, and this is AgentConf in Dornbirn.
Amazing venue. Austria is beautiful. Meeting all of the people in the community and getting to go and hang out and ski.